Hello, I'm Dan Tomberlin. I am the Executive Director of PTS Thrive at Pentecostal Theological Seminary. And PTS Thrive is an initiative of the seminary where we want to coach and mentor early career pastors or pastors who have been engaged in ministry for a while, but they're going through a significant transition or significant conflict. Over the last 2 or 3 years, we have made contact with almost 300 Church of God pastors and are engaged in mentoring and coaching and encouraging them in the ministry. So I want to encourage you to like our PTS Thrive Facebook page. Also, we have a PTS Thrive YouTube channel, and you can search that and see many of the videos we've posted there that are designed specifically for the pastors that we're trying to reach. Tonight, we're going to talk about pastoral self-care. And Dr. Tim Maness is with us. He is with the Church of God Ministerial Care. And he's going to be with us to talk about what pastoral care is about and how we can take care of ourselves so that we don't burn out. What are some of the things that we need to be looking for?
Sure.
And talk to us a little bit about what pastoral self-care is.
Absolutely. Well, first, let me just say, Dan, it's an honor to be here, and this is something that I'm very passionate about. We've been doing this. I've been at Ministerial Care now for, dating myself a little over a decade. It's hard to believe. And we've seen a lot of ministers and couples and PKs come through our office at that time, throughout that time. And honestly, with the pandemic, you know, your question is kind of twofold right now.
Yeah.
Because there was, you know, how do we approach this pre-COVID and how do we approach this post-COVID? Because so much has changed. We have to be able to recognize that right now we're not living in the same world that we were living in a year ago or even a few months ago. And that's not a lack of faith. That's not me panicking. That's not.
It's what it
that's
is.
just what it is. Mm-hmm. And being able to face that and still have faith. That's what I'm looking at here. And you talk about pastoral self-care. It's such an interesting subject because the ministers that we have seen and that I have had the opportunity to work with, the majority of them are great caretakers, great pastors. They love what they do. They enjoy what they do. That will do whatever they can to try to help people that are under them in the Lord. But sometimes whenever we do that to our own detriment. And caregivers are great sometimes at caring for other people. We're not so great at taking care of ourselves. And there's reasons for that. We feel like it's selfish. We feel like there's always more that we could be doing, so we feel guilty whenever we step back. But the reality is, and I've said this before many times, that self-care is not just about you. It's about your church. It's about the people you're trying to help. And in order for us to be really more effective in what we're doing, I think we need to take it seriously and be, you know, not just try to work through that anxiety. If we're having anxiety, maybe we need to step back and kind of reevaluate where that's coming from. Maybe we do need a rest. Maybe we do need to take some time off. Maybe we need to learn to disengage and let go.
There's something that we talk about sometimes, this concept of vicarious trauma.
Yeah.
That pastors have a tendency to bring the trauma that they're engaged with, other people are encountering, that pastors have a way of bringing this trauma upon themselves.
Right.
And it becomes overwhelming. It becomes a burden.
Yeah. Yeah, it does, and it stacks. I mean, I'm reminded of a time when I was pastoring, you know, before we moved here to Cleveland and worked at Ministerial Care. I served as a lead pastor for many years, and I'll never forget getting the call of doing a funeral of a 2-year-old. And I was a young minister at the time. I had never felt so inadequate, underprepared in my life. And I thought to myself, what in the world am I going to be able to bring to this family to offer any type of peace and relief? And it was through an accident. It was, you know, it was a situation where he got on the shelf and it just, he didn't survive it. And I'll never forget, my son at the time was 2 years old. It was our first son. And walking in there and thinking, Lord, what do I do? I don't think there's any way to prepare yourself for that. And I thought I had a good handle on it, just like a lot of us younger ministers often do. I think a lot of us just being naive. But I remember walking up to that casket, and it's still etched in my brain today, the size of that casket. It's just not normal to see a casket that size. And he had a little Xbox remote, and his picture, I can picture him today. It's ingrained in my brain. That's a traumatic experience that oftentimes we go through that process, but we don't think about that having an effect on us long term. And I remember going home that night after the funeral, and I offered hope as best as I can, and seeing him again, and we want to make sure that we're there with him, and this is a time to grieve, and that kind of thing, and going home and crying. And I cried. I held my 2-year-old son in my arms, and I wept for the next 30 minutes. And that's just one instance.
Yeah.
A lot of our ministers are doing that, and then the next day there's something else. And then perhaps what if you have a situation where you're celebrating a new birth 1 minute, and then an hour later there's a death.
And that's common.
And you're doing this. Eventually, that's going to have a toll on you, on your emotions. It's going to have a toll on your mental outlook. And that's going to wear on you over time if we don't step back and realize, you know what, we might need to get some help. And
Several years ago, this was probably 2004, there was a period of 10 days where I did 7 funerals. It began with the death of my father's baby brother, my uncle.
Yeah.
And it ended with the death of my father's older brother, again, my uncle. And in between that, I had the other funerals to deal with. And of course, you preach on Sunday.
Yeah.
You continue to try to move ahead. But I think what we don't do well, and I can't say that I did it well, is that we layer the trauma and ignore the emotional burden that it puts on us.
Yeah.
My brother died at 50 years old a few years ago. He's my younger brother. We had his memorial service in Destin, Florida. Losing Randy was an open wound for me, and immediately when I got back to Vidalia, one of our members lost their sister.
Yeah.
And wanted me to go to the nursing home, and so I did. I did what pastors do.
Sure.
I put my own grief aside and went to the nursing home. As I walked in the nursing home and got to the area where we were visiting with the family, I was really overwhelmed. And finally, I looked at my friend who was also my member, and I just said, "You're going to have to forgive me, but I've got to leave, and I cannot attend the funeral tomorrow."
Wow.
And I did 2 more funerals within the next 2 or 3 months there that they were like opening wounds.
Yeah.
And I think that what we do sometimes is we have this sense that because we are empowered by the Holy Spirit, that we can move through these very anxious, very grief-filled moments.
Yeah.
And we're dealing with other people's suffering. We're dealing with our own suffering. And I think what happens is that we end up carrying these wounds with us, and they affect us in ways that we're not aware of for years.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that goes with us everywhere we go. It's not like if you're at the office, something that's happening, and then when you get home, you can just leave it at the office. You take that, I call it the emotional cup, that goes with you. And so not only is that going to affect you, but if my cup overflowing here, and I don't mean that in a good sense, your emotions are just all over the place, you become reactive because you don't realize, you're not consciously thinking about the effect that this has had on you and your emotions. It can affect your marriage. It can affect how you respond to your kids. It can affect how you become short, become temperamental, those kind of things. It bleeds into that. And so being able to recognize, you mentioned, you would get up and you would preach. What did you do? You put on a smile.
Sure.
You try to act like everything's fine.
Put on the face and put on the suit.
Put on the face, put on the suit. I probably should stick to counseling mode. I'm about to go into preaching mode here for a moment because it's interesting to me, and I understand some people don't like wearing a mask, just using the pandemic that we're in. for various reasons. I don't either. It fogs up my glasses. I have a hard time breathing. I really recognize when I have bad breath. I guess that's a good thing. But for those of us that don't like wearing that mask, what's so interesting is that for years
we wear them anyway.
A mask.
Sure.
And we're okay with that. Until we get to a point to where you can only hold so much. And what you're saying, Dan, is, my goodness, we're human beings. Where's the grace that we offer to everyone else? The compassion, the love, the care. And we struggle so much to offer that to ourselves and giving ourselves slack. And we are sometimes our own worst critics. We will beat ourselves to a bloody pulp and then try to smile afterwards.
You talked about that emotional cup. There is one of the things that is unique about doing ministry as a vocation is that we are emotionally connected 24 hours a day to the people we serve.
Yeah.
Any pastor who takes the call seriously has to care about the people they shepherd.
Absolutely.
So when they suffer, you grieve.
Yeah, absolutely.
And pastoring, I was a pastor for 38 years. It is something that you carry with you. And, everybody likes to talk about the bad Mondays. I didn't wait to Monday. Sunday nights were devastating for me.
Yeah.
I would go home and sit in the recliner and just relive everything that happened that Sunday morning and Sunday night and, want to quit,
Absolutely.
The other thing is, even though I would take a vacation or take a day off, and this happened on several occasions. I could be somewhere in Florida with my kids to get a phone call, somebody in the church had died.
Yeah.
You pack up, you go home.
Yeah.
You're never emotionally disconnected from the job.
No. And let's be honest, those times, and we've counseled with people to where many of our ministers, they'll say, well, we take vacation, we take time off. But after talking with them for a little bit, they begin to kind of realize, I haven't really had a day off.
Right.
I'm glad that, we're starting to take it kind of serious now in the Church of God and start to realize, okay, we need to do something. And I know we had that passed at the General Assembly a few years ago about sabbaticals, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very good, healthy step that we're taking. But I think we have to realize that the effect that this has on us if we don't learn to kind of realize, I really need to take time off. And the reality of it, Dan, we're not good at it. We're not good at it. For me to be out of the office, and say, I'm going to take time off, I'm going to take the day. It doesn't mean necessarily I'm not going to look, I need to do some sermon prep, right? I could make this one phone call, this other phone, I do need, and before you know it, you've just worked. That's not a day off, and we're not good at being still, and we're not good at letting go. And so we kind of, whether it be through anxiety or just that compulsion to feel like we got to do. And taking time off, we say it so often, and you need to take a day off, you need to take a vacation, and we make it sound like it's easy. And for many of our ministers, it's not easy because it doesn't come natural to them.
Well, most of our ministers are bivocational.
Yeah.
In the Church of God, not just Church of God, across the board, most pastors are bivocational.
Yeah.
Most pastors will never serve a congregation of more than 80 people. Mm-hmm. So you've got pastors who are wholeheartedly serving these churches, and I agree with you. My opinion of Church of God pastors is that they really are a great group of people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I've been around it now for almost 40 years, mm-hmm. and there are Church of God pastors that are as dear to me as my brothers are.
Yeah.
But you've got these bivocational pastors who are underemployed because their church they serve cannot afford to pay them, so their primary concern is, they've got to make a living, they've got to support their family. So these pastors are working 60 and 75 hours a week. They're working 40, 45 hours a week in their primary job, and then they're doing sermon prep and visitation.
Yeah.
So how are we going, because for them to say you've got to take time off, well, they have two jobs.
Yeah, it's a lot easier said than done, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, especially with our bivocational. I have I have so much respect for our ministers out there that are doing everything they can to kind of help provide for their family. You know, you got to pay the bills and work a secular job and still, and let's be honest, you know, if you're part-time in one job, most of them are full-time. And if you're working for a church, you're putting in full-time hours.
It's full-time.
Like
it's
you said.
full-time.
And so I think a lot of it goes back to allowing yourself the grace, okay, to quit being so, because, you know, and where do we find our identity also? Because we're kind of touching up on it, we're not really directly discussing it, is, you know, is our identity in Christ or is it found in our position?
All right, let's talk about that, because most pastors have a difficult time making the separation there.
They do.
We think the position that it is to the church is Christ.
Yeah.
And now, logically, we know it's not.
Right.
Now, we do know that the church is the body of Christ.
Sure.
But the point that we have to, that I think that too many pastors struggle with, is that our vocational identity, our personal identity, is built up on what we call this call of God. We're men and women of God.
Yeah.
And that we're committed to this, but that too many times, it's amazing how we can be so busy being committed to the vocation of ministry,
right,
but our relationship with Christ suffers.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's, you know, when you're talking about self-care, I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, but you have to have a strong prayer life. And when I say prayer life, not praying for others, right? Not praying for what God's going to do in your church. What is God speaking to you? How can God help you? What can, you know, Dr. Fred Garman does such a wonderful job with Leader Labs. I've had the joy and the honor of being involved in his Leader Labs a couple times now.
Yes, as have I.
I'm going to become a Garmanite before too long. I don't know if that's a word, but I made it up.
We'll make it up.
We'll make it up. But he always says this at the beginning of his sessions, and it's so true. Leadership development starts with self-development. And you can't, to me, it goes hand in hand. You can't have self-development if you don't have self-care, you know, and because a lot of what we're doing, whether it be leadership, we're trying to sharpen the blades, if you will. We're trying to hone our craft, get better at it. And I want to go back to the bivocational thing, because I don't feel like I fully answered that for just a moment. I think offering ourselves grace, allowing ourselves to have slack, but I think there's more to it than that. Understanding our limitations. We are all limited. We can't do everything. I know it's hard. It's hard for us to kind of envision that, but that's why we have the church. That's why we have other people to rely upon. That's why we need to delegate and trust others that they're going to be able to help you in that process. So when you're talking bivocational, I think it's important. You may only be able to do so much this week. That's okay. You know, allow God. When I was in seminary, I learned very quickly, and at least too, I was notorious at procrastinating. I know you never did that, Dan. I know that that's something that was really far from you, and you never do that, but I would do that. And I got really good at it, and I would almost brag about it, you know, that I could stay up and start on a paper the night before, finish the paper, and get an A. You know, it was like a adrenaline hit for me. Eventually it would catch up to me. And what I realized is I can work through, I can try to burn the midnight oil, be completely exhausted, work on a paper at 12 o'clock in the morning, and I would look at the screen and it made no sense. And when I was writing my dissertation, I realized this is not going to work. I can't function this way. I'm not getting anything done. So I would spend 10 hours and do nothing, but get frustrated. And then my frustration would cause more frustration. So what I had to do is take a step back, take a nap, okay? Or as soon as I get up in the morning, work on it, because then my brain is fresh. I'm not falling asleep. I'm not, you know, writing something that makes no sense. I know you all have done that. When you're just getting so tired and you look at the screen and you're writing a sentence and it makes no sense whatsoever because you're exhausted at that point. And so bivocational, I think it's even more so important for bivocation because they're so limited. Many of them have families. So there's that component too. That does take time to spend time with your spouse and with your kids. And so sometimes less is more in regards to this. If I can take a break, if I can step away from it, take a nap, come at it fresh, I can get more done in an hour, hour and a half than what I would have ever been able to do 6, 7, 8 hours. And we have to learn to do that. and it's trial and error. It's not easy, but it's doable.
I was a bivocational pastor for the first 15 years of my ministry, and I can, I think back on that a lot. I wouldn't take anything for that time.
Yeah.
But it was a very difficult time.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very difficult time, and part of that time I was bivocational. I was serving the church, working a full-time job, and trying to finish a bachelor's degree at the same time. So
Wow.
I basically had 3 jobs.
Yeah.
There is a sense, very real sense, that we get energized by the activity,
Yeah.
but we don't realize how burned out, how quickly we can become burned out.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that I think that pastors don't get, we think about being trained to serve as a pastor. We think about studying the Bible. I think one of the things that pastors don't get is this concept of self-care. I had a conversation with a pastor a few weeks ago, and I was going through some questions with him, and talking about his life in the church and his vocational and his studies and everything. And then I asked him something about his personal life. He said, "Well, I've got a few things personally, but I really need to talk about the church vocation." And I immediately pushed back. I said, No.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your personal stuff first.
Sure.
Because your personal stuff will burn you out.
Right.
Your personal stuff will cause you to fail in ministry.
Yes.
Your personal stuff will cause you to fall into immorality.
Yeah.
And I don't think let me put it this way. That's one of the areas that I think that we've not done well in ministerial development and leadership.
Sure.
Is talk about how this ongoing concept of taking care of the personal self.
Yeah.
Developing emotional boundaries.
Yes.
Making sure that we're taking care of our families. I was sharing with you earlier, and I've said this dozens of times, but early on when I began ministry, I made the decision. I have 2 sons, and I've said this many times. If I spent my entire life in ministry and won 2 people to Jesus,
Sure.
as long as it's Aaron and Nathan, I'm
Absolutely.
good.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for anything beyond that,
Yeah.
but my primary call in life was to be a good father to Aaron and Nathan.
Absolutely.
And now to be a good grandfather to Eli, Levi, and Olivia.
Yes.
And I find that that helps me be a better pastor and a better minister.
Yes, it does. It really does, and it's priorities. And I think that you really touched up on something. I heard a professor say when I was at Lee, and it really stuck with me. But it's so true today. There is no ministry that is so important that your family can go to hell. And we see it quite often. And so I want you to just understand the care and the love that I have for our ministers and what we see. It's really important for us to be able to step back, because it can be depressing, right? Whenever you see the turmoil and what the ministry has done to some of our families, and the enemy is very crafty. I feel like sometimes if he can just keep us busy, like you said, it makes us feel good. All the while, not even realizing it, our family could be crumbling. We don't really know what's going on with our son or with our daughter, and it's just a different world today. And so you really touched up on something that is very crucial in the fact that our ministers are living in a glass house. They're scrutinized a lot. There used to be a time.
Their kids are scrutinized.
Their kids are very much scrutinized, and they're not allowed to be kids.
Right.
Kids are going to do things that's going to be embarrassing. They're going to say things. Those are kids. That's part of it. And allowing them that freedom to kind of develop into who God's called them to be. And but it's tough. And you signed up for it, and perhaps your spouse signed up for it.
But they didn't.
But they did not. And I married a PK. Raymond does a phenomenal job with our restoration process and with our clients there, my colleague there, and he's a PK. And so I've got a soft spot for that. And you want to see our ministers do well. But when I say that, I'm not talking about the church. That's part of it. I get that. We want to see them do well in their personal life, their marriage. We want to see their kids do well, and we've got to get that back. It's so vitally important. And really today with the pandemic, it's people are forced to stay home more often. The numbers, not in ministry per se, but just overall, we're seeing a rise in domestic abuse and those things take place. And, it's sad to see. But I have hope because, like I said, the ministers that I see, that I help, oftentimes really do want to they want to do better. Mm-hmm. And I have to look in the mirror and say, what can I do to do better? And having those kind of things before us. If I'm here today talking with you in this invitation, if it's just about me, I shouldn't be here. I get nervous. My heart starts to beat. It's been a while. I've been doing counseling now for over a decade, but I know how important this subject is. I know it's important for our ministers, and I want them to know there's a place they can go to. There's a place they can call. There's a place that understands a little bit about what they're going through, and we're going to help. That's what we're going to do.
I've been, again, part of the Church of God ministry. I was my first credential was dated in 1978. That's how far back I go.
Okay.
One of the things I've noticed through the years is we have these rising stars in ministry.
Yeah.
We know how it works. They make the camp meeting circuit. But one of the things I've noticed through the years is that many of those rising stars fall very quickly. Mm-hmm. Which suggests that even though they were successful in pastoring and successful in their personal persona,
right,
that there were some serious issues there. You don't have to be a rising star to develop those serious issues.
True.
So the thing that I used to struggle with the most, we're all performance driven.
Yeah.
Our society makes us performance driven, whether we want to admit it or not. The church makes us performance driven.
Yes.
We're always looking at our stats.
Yep.
We like to say that we're not, that if somebody leaves the church, it doesn't bother us. But I'm telling you, every time somebody left a church I pastored, it broke my heart.
It's hard not to take it personal.
You take it personal, and it happens over and over again. So, and the thing that I've told people, pastors many times, when you're studying theology, you learn this concept that incommunicable attributes of God, which means that God is omnipresent, omniscient, all-powerful, all-present, everywhere. The thing is that I'm trying to get to here is that we call them incommunicable. In other words, God does not share those characteristics with us.
Yeah.
A pastor is not all-powerful.
No.
A pastor does not know everything.
No.
A pastor cannot be everywhere present. And my favorite verse in the New Testament is the story when Mary and Martha called Jesus to go, Lazarus is sick, come pray for him. And he stays there for 4 days.
He does.
And, I've through the years, I've gotten some criticism sometimes because I didn't react as quickly as some of the people I served thought I should. But I always knew, or let me put it this way, I eventually learned that I could not be everywhere present. And that I am not all powerful.
And you had to come to terms with that.
I had to come to terms with that.
Sure.
And it was only as I came to terms with that I could, and I had probably been a minister 25 years by this time.
Right.
And I only came to terms with it because I was so tired and so burnt out.
Sure.
And I would get up in the morning not want to do what I was called to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just had to come to that realization that maybe I've made this job something it's not supposed to be.
Wow.
And I think that's one of the things that we've done. When you talk about suicides or family breakups and pastoral failures, I really do think that we've turned this thing into a monster.
Oh, absolutely.
That we do have to be all powerful. We have to know everything. Think about what a pastor has to be. He has to be a theologian. He has to be a student of Scripture. He has to be an administrator. He has to know financial stuff. That's not the biblical concept of what a pastor is.
No.
The biblical concept of a pastor is one who teaches and shepherds the people of God.
Yes.
And so, and pastors, every leader, one of the things I like to say a lot in my leadership classes is every leader has feet of clay. Mm-hmm. And what that means, it doesn't matter how tall you are or how powerful you are.
Right.
That your Achilles heel, we have feet of clay.
Yeah, that's good.
And if we don't have that firm foundation, we are going to crumble.
Oh, absolutely. And you mentioned on a word that's very key here in perfection. And a lot of our ministers have gotten to a point where we're perfectionists And so we have the ideal and then the reality. And so if the reality doesn't meet what we have ideally of what's going to happen on Sunday morning or Sunday night or whether it be numbers, boom, there's immediate failure. This sense of shame that kind of comes over us. I didn't do enough. Maybe I should have done this. We regret. Maybe I shouldn't, And so these thought patterns come into our mind, and they do control us. They control how we respond to that. And if we're not careful, we'll let the shame kind of dictate us in a way that causes us to kind of retreat and become isolated. One of the things we brag, I said I used to brag about my procrastination until it caught up to me. We brag about what we do for Christ a lot of times, whether it be, I preached this and God's doing this and I was able to do this and I look at what I did. And we share that so openly, not realizing perhaps the person we're sharing that to may feel inadequate in certain ways. And they're like, man, I wish I had that, and I'm not doing enough. We have people in our office all the time dealing with burnout. Burnout's a really common thing now. And I try to equate it this way. When you look at Genesis and the creation story, right? God's creating the world, if you will. And you see this phrase repeated quite often, it is good. And so God created it, and it is good, it is good, it is good. It's as if God was enjoying what he was doing. He was creating something good, was enjoying that process. It was beautiful, and it's like he kind of stepped back and admired the work that he was doing. Burnout isn't that you're not doing anything good. You just don't see any good. And so we see people that can be growing. There are people can be doing well. There's really not any major issues going on that you can think of. And people are getting saved. Things are going well, but the minister doesn't feel like he's done anything good. And that's when you lose that joy.
I have been there so many times.
You've been there. And you don't see it,
And you hide it. If you do recognize it, you hide it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, you get to a point where you don't even want to take any type of, we kind of dismiss it, right? We kind of don't want to take any credit for that. But, and so there's that disconnect. And I think it's God's plan for us to want to enjoy the calling that we're walking in.
Let me share with you, and I want to get to what we've been doing is diagnosing the issue. So what we want to do next is talk about some prescriptions. But I do want to share this. Most folks who know me and follow me on social media know that my wife and I both had COVID back in March.
Yeah.
We were literally locked inside the house for about 3 weeks. And then because of COVID, the seminary office is shut down, so we were working at home. One of the things that happened during this time, strangely enough, I used to say that my idea of a perfect yard was asphalt it and paint it green.
Yeah.
But I began working in the yard.
Mm-hmm.
I planted a vegetable garden. I began tending to azaleas. I began bird watching. I set up bird feeding stations in my backyard, and I know more about birds now than I've ever cared to know. But one of the things that has done is it has given me things to do that are enjoyable, that put me back in touch with the garden.
Yes.
When God created Adam and Eve, he put them in a garden.
He did.
That's where we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I find that the amazing thing now is in the afternoons, instead of watching television,
right,
my wife and I are on the back porch watching the birds.
Wow.
And we're talking.
Yeah.
Something you don't do when you're watching television together.
No.
We're talking. We're enjoying each other. Mm-hmm. And I hate to admit it, Tim, but this is the first time in our lives.
Wow.
That I've been this way, because I was always trying to stay so busy doing ministry. Yeah. Now, I do think that Sharon and I made the right call when it came to raising the kids. We always had priority there.
Right.
And I mean, we've been married for 40 years. Mm-hmm. So, we've got that solid relationship. But I hate to say it, but it was COVID and the shutdown that put us in a situation where we actually began to sit back and learn how to enjoy things again.
Right. So you were kind of forced to do something different.
I was forced to do something different to fill the time.
Yeah.
I've never grown anything in my life. And now I have squash and tomatoes and cantaloupes in my backyard.
Absolutely. That's great though. Yeah.
So let's talk about the prescriptions. We understand the problems.
Right.
Every pastor that is listening to our voice, I'm sure, is just nodding their head.
Yes.
I see that every time I do a seminar. I see pastors just nodding their heads. We know what the problem is. So what are the things that we should do? Maybe disciplines that we can embrace, lifestyle changes that we need to make that help us take care of ourselves so that we can be better pastors.
I'm glad that because I've got a few things here to kind of discuss, and really that process that you were sharing with Dan is doing something out of the ordinary. Kind of when we're in a rut, sometimes we have to kind of force ourselves to do something that's going to help us, that we know perhaps might help us feel better. That's okay. Some people listen to worship music. Some people listen, get into the Word. Other people go out bird watching and work in the garden, and those are all healthy things to be able to do. And it's a shame it takes a pandemic to do that, right? We learn a lot about ourselves in these moments. I've learned a lot about myself. I'm an introvert, but I've struggled myself with it, and so it can be difficult. Let me just share this, and I'm going to get into the prescription here because this won't take too long. But I remember when I was pastoring, our thought process sometimes it doesn't make any sense. And I remember pastoring, and we got a phone call at 3:00 in the morning. Okay, now I know this is going to be shocking to you guys, but I was asleep at 3. I like to sleep. I really do.
Especially at 3:00 in the morning.
Especially at 3:00 in the morning. Now, some of my, they may get up at 3:00 in the morning and go work. That was not me. But I remember getting my phone and hello, and my wife woke up. She's like, "What are you doing?" And I didn't want to answer the phone, making it look like I had been asleep, because in my mind it's like, it's a church member. They're doing. I want them, And so I answered the phone. Hello. Pastor, I hope we didn't disturb you
at 3:00 in the morning.
Bothered you at 3:00. Oh, and honestly, I think I said this. Lord help me. Oh no, I was, I had you guys on my mind, or I was praying or something like that. I didn't want them, for crying out loud, to think I was sleeping at 3 in the morning. And so we kind of have this kind of idea that we have to attain to a certain level of perfection that, quite frankly, is just unattainable, and that kind of goes into unrealistic expectations. To talk about self-care, one of the main things that you have to discuss is spiritual self-care. Okay, that's important. All of these, I think, are connected. They're not separate from one another. Your spiritual self-care is going to affect your relational life. Right? It's going to bleed over into other areas of your life. But spiritual self-care, and what I mean by that is not the fact that you're praying for your church, not the fact that you're reading scripture for a sermon, right? Because we often go into that mode because of time constraints. But what are you doing to pray for you? What are your needs? We kind of lose that in the process. It's not just about the needs. You know what, Pastor? You have needs as well. You have dreams, you have desires. What is it that you want God to speak to you in your life? And then whenever you're reading scripture, it's not just for a sermon, it's for you. I believe we have to stand under that word and allow it to speak to us before we can begin to preach that word to others. And so allowing that to kind of change you and allow yourself to feel good about that. So the spiritual self-care obviously is so important. 40% of pastors says that it is somewhat difficult to find time to invest in their own spiritual development. And we see that quite often. And then number 2, I would suggest emotional self-care. We are emotional beings, okay? That's just the reality of it. And with Pentecostalism, we celebrate that at times, but we don't want to allow our emotions to control us. The Bible talks about the heart being evil.
Right.
It also talks about there's a way that might seem right to a man. Everyone's right in their own eyes, and so to be emotionally healthy, we have to take inventory and we have to be intentional with emotional self-care. This really involves working through 4 identity issues: personality, because we all have different personalities, okay? Family of origins, and the distinction between the role and the person, knowing that this is the role and the function that God's called you to, but not allowing the role to completely define who you are. Your success or failure does not define who you are in Christ as a pastor. Whatever
Right.
success you have, it kind of goes back to that. And this often involves a close friend. I have a hard time, evaluating myself. Okay, diagnosing myself. I'm awful at it. We're not very good. We're kind of biased, and so we're not. So we need a close friend. I would suggest if you know somebody that's not even Church of God to kind of give you a different perspective.
Right.
I think is extremely healthy, because if your source of connection is with everyone in the same denomination, if you will, the Church of God, we can kind of lose perspective sometimes. And sometimes a counselor helps there as well. And then number 3, relational self-care. Now, all these things that I have mentioned so far are not just for you. It's for the way you serve, the way you help others, the way you minister. It is for you, but it also affects how we respond to other people. So relational self-care involves having a support system of strong, safe friends or family. We should be able to be vulnerable with our spouse. We should be able to sit down with our kids and depending upon their age group, and have open, honest dialogue and say, this is who I am. I'm not perfect, but I want you to know that I love you. I'm here for you. And allowing ourselves to be intimate. And sometimes we have a hard time with that, because the more hurt we have, the more closed we become.
There is an issue here that I really do think that leads to pastoral burnout, and that is that in all of the research that we do, one of the things that pastors say is that they feel alone.
Yep.
And they don't have friends.
Yeah.
The nature of the way we've done the ministry is that we've become competitive with other pastors. Mm-hmm. And we don't feel safe in developing relationships.
Yeah.
The other part of it is, quite frankly, is that we've been burned. Pastors have not shared. We go and we share something confidential, and then we
Boom.
It comes out.
Yeah.
But with that said, one of the things I really think that sustained me, I'd never suffered from being alone. Mm-hmm. But I think it was because I was always proactive in developing relationships.
Yeah.
And something you said is something I did many times. I went outside the Church of God in communities where I pastored. Mm-hmm. Some of the best relationships I had were with the Baptist or Presbyterian or even a Roman Catholic pastors there that I got to know. When I was in Vidalia, the Roman Catholic pastor there was a super guy, and he and I made it a point. We had a biscuit at Hardee's once a month, and we just sat there and drank coffee and talked for 2 hours.
Absolutely.
Sometimes we talked about football, and I don't give a rip about football.
Yeah.
But we'd talk about theology, but we had that relationship.
Yeah.
There were other pastors, and because I was always proactive in developing those relationships, it was very easy for me to say, call one of them and say, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee.
Yes.
I think that one of the things that our pastors need to do is learn to be proactive in developing these relationships.
Absolutely.
Find the men and women out there. Find those men that you can be confident in.
Yeah.
And there are pastors that we pastored in the same community together 20 and 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. That I still stay in contact with, that are still my friends, that are still my confidants.
That's wonderful.
And I think that is one of the most important things that a pastor could do in that developing that relationship and that self-care.
I agree. God did not create us to be an island of ourselves. We're created for community. And having that and having that kind of relationship, when we're talking about relational self-care, that person in your life, whether it be a brother in the Lord, whether it be a spouse, someone that's going to be open and honest with you because they care about you. I need that. One of the things that I tell this story quite often, I'm going to try not to get myself in trouble, but I remember when Mel and I were dating, me trying to break up with her. and she wouldn't let me. You know,
You're going to be in trouble.
I'm going to get in trouble. I know. She wouldn't let me, and she was in campus choir. They were fixing to take a trip to Texas, and I was like, "What are you talking about? It's over with." And she said something to me that I probably needed to hear, and I didn't like it. And she's gone for a week. I miss her like crazy. Okay, and the rest is history. It's really the best decision she's made for me in my life. But I realized I needed someone in my life that would shoot straight with me and be open and honest because she cares. And as iron sharpens iron, that starts in the marital covenant. Right. But outside of that, even if you don't have to have a lot. If we might have 3,000 Facebook friends, that's not what we're talking. If you just have one or two, that's all you need, because a lot of people don't have that. And so try to be intentional with that relationship and be relational and have that relational self-care. And then 4, the one we really talk about now that we're kind of, which is good. I'm glad that we're paying attention to the physical aspect of this, of what it's doing to our bodies. God created us to go at camel speed, and we're trying to go like we're supersonic jets. Eventually, we're going to break down. It goes against God's design. And you have medical experts that tell us that, you need to rest. We know what stress can do to us. All of us have stress. I understand that. But I remember a doctor asking one of his patients about stress. He had just had open heart surgery. And he said, "You're going to have to slow down." And he became very defiant. He said, "Slow down? I don't need to slow down." And he said, "No, I'm telling you, if you don't slow down, you're not going to live much longer. And you got too much stress in your life." And the patient looked at the doctor and he said, "Doc, I don't think I can." He said, "Why not?" "Because the stress that I have feels too good." And it does become intoxicating. And so we get to a point to where we don't know what it's like to have that gentle, quiet place in our lives that we need to be alone. I mean, I understand we're talking about relationships, but there are times we need to be alone as well. There's a balance there. And so we're talking about physical self-care. Take care of, and I'm constantly, I need this myself. I need to start watching better what I eat. It's hard, especially in a pandemic. When you're not going out, restaurants are closed, you're going to go to the first thing that's available. And it's probably not healthy for you. Yeah. But it is what it is. But, try to exercise. I've never seen someone that went to go exercise and say, I feel worse. Right. And I know a lot of the gyms are closed right now, but we can do that at home or go for a walk. Do things that's going to help you feel better, because this body was made to move, and we need that. So we need physical self-care. And then finally, I would suggest intellectual self-care. Reading a book, whether getting educated, whether it be formal or informal. We need to strengthen that mind, if you will. Dedicate time for enrichment, whether it be reading, reflection, thinking about what God has done in our lives, those kind of things. So we need to kind of hone that as well. But understand this: self-care is not selfish. It is a vital part of your ministry, and it's a vital part to your community. And when we neglect this, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, the love that we have for a neighbor is not selfish. It's the love that Christ has for us. When you neglect that, you're putting yourself at risk. And one of our goals at Ministerial Care is to try to help you finish the calling that God has put upon you in your life. We want you to be able to finish that.
What we've talked about for the last hour is anyone who's pastored for any amount of time knows the difficulties, the emotional difficulties. Our goal here is just to be able to give you some ideas on this prescription that Tim shared with us on ways that we can turn this around. And I would suggest of the 4 or 5 things that he suggested, if you could just do 2 or 3 of them,
absolutely, yeah,
that it would turn around. One of the things, I do have a weight problem. I do, food is a comfort thing with me, and it has been all of my life. I've lost 50 and 60 pounds 3 times and gained it all back, so I understand that. But even though I have that issue, I love to walk and hike.
Yeah.
And, to go on a long walk is a very refreshing thing for me.
Yeah.
And it clears the mind, it energizes the body.
It does.
It does take some time, but it's time well spent.
Absolutely.
I do want to encourage you, if there are ways that we can help you at PTS Thrive, encourage you to develop these disciplines, to do the self-care, or even with Dr. Maness at his office. You don't have to be in trouble to call Tim Maness.
No. Actually, a lot of the work that we do is preventive.
Right.
We're getting people coming in, ministers say, I want to just try to see if I can do better in this area. And it's not major, and that's fine. We're here for you. And leadership of the Church of God cares enough about you as a minister and your family that they've invested in this. It just doesn't cost you anything. Just a phone call and a willingness to do that. And we had started a year ago, Dan, to start doing online counseling through Zoom, and it's been a big hit. I'm glad now we've done it, obviously. But any way that we can to try, like I said, it's not about me, it's about you. If we get to a point to where we talk about self-care, I won't schedule a full day of counseling, because if you're at the end of that day, I'm not going to be good to you or me. And so, but this is about our ministers, and if there's anything we can do to support you, to help you, we are there to help, and that's what we're going to do, and we're going to be confidential with it.
The Church of God has many resources for our pastors. Our state and regional offices have ways
absolutely.
to put you in contact with the opportunities that the church offers. Ministerial care is available to you. Pentecostal Theological Seminary is available to you. So we don't want you to feel like if you're out there and you do feel lonely, you do feel burnt out, you do feel stressed out, you do feel overwhelmed emotionally, there are ways that we can help process this and ways that we can help encourage you. So I would just want to encourage you. I just want to tell this one last story. It was a point when my grandfather died several years ago. We had the funeral here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and on a Saturday, and I was pastoring in South Georgia. And after his funeral that afternoon, many of my great aunts and uncles begged us, Dan, won't you stay the weekend? Let's spend some time together. And my response was, no, I've got to be back to preach tomorrow.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I got back in the car and drove back to South Georgia so I could preach at my church the next morning. I have regretted that all of my life, because that was the last time I saw many of those great aunts and uncles alive. So we need to take time to love our families,
absolutely,
to enjoy our extended families, to go to ball games. We like to tell jokes about the lazy preachers. There are some lazy preachers out there.
We don't see them.
I don't see it.
They don't call us. They're too lazy, I guess.
Most of the pastors I know are hardworking, well-intentioned, I would say sometimes overworking.
Yeah, I agree.
So we want to encourage you. You can contact Ministerial Care. You can contact us here at Pentecostal Theological Seminary, or you can contact your regional or state office, and I'm sure that they can point you in the right direction. But self-care, spiritual development, intellectual development is what's going to give you the strength to finish well, and we want to see you finish well.
Absolutely.
God bless you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.